Okay, dear classmates, it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker today. A good friend of mine. Actually, I know his family for years, and I'm really surprised to have Ian with us today. Well, Mr. Ian here, our speaker is actually a super all-rounder. He's nurtured in a banker's family with a heart and a soul. He graduated in Princeton University, majored in economics, and he actually is holding a CFA. But he is also an entrepreneur. He established his own company, the Guardian Capital, focusing on global trade investment using behavioral economic principles, and he's actually surpassing the performance of the regular indexes like MSCI indexes. And he is also an expert in negotiation. He is part of the negotiating team in the selling of the Qing Bank in Macau to ICBC, 工商銀行, in 2007 with a very, very reasonable price in terms of the seller. He is also a great educator. He's established Alpha Institute Asia and provides training for a lot of institutions, including Hutchison Telecom and the Hong Kong Jockey Club, where some of our classmates are working. And he's also a regular speaker in a lot of public conferences, and also in Professor Andrew Chan's New Thinking Management program in our CUHK. But one very special thing about him, although you learned that he received his education in the West, he is also an expert in Chinese history, Chinese literature, calligraphy, and today he's going to bring us back 150 years to Hong Kong and China about the first Opium War. So let's welcome Mr. Ian Yu.
Thank you, Professor Chan. Usually, when I'm the privilege to be in the same room as him, usually it's him doing the talking and me just looking up. But today, I have the privilege, and also thank you, Professor Chan. For he's a great visionary as an educator, but more importantly, of his courage of even getting someone like me to be talking. And when he contacted me, he was like, "I want you to talk about history," and I thought it was a little bit wide, the topic. So today I want to focus on one specific event, an event that is so important, which is the reason why all of us here are in this room, and that's the First Opium War. I think most people already have a general idea about the Opium War. I want to talk more about the Opium War in terms of, it's not just the war between two countries. It's not just the war of a trade war. Most people think it's a trade war. I actually hypothesize today that the Opium War is actually a war on monetary system, on currencies. And actually, we're in a juncture where the renminbi is in the process of free flow and also in internationalization. And so, understanding the Opium War is absolutely crucial for everybody who's related to China in terms of the future of our country. So, let me bring you back 155 years on the Opium War. As you can see, you can lose weight having opium. And so, first, to set the stage, everybody knows about the story of three piglets. I'm going to tell you a story of two pigs. So everybody knows that China tried to ban opium, but there was a time when actually the UK tried to ban tea, because tea they thought was addictive and they were losing silver. So I'm going to tell you a story of two pigs. They tried to do an experiment that tea is bad for you. So there are two pigs. One pig had a regular diet, the other pig had nothing but oolong tea. And so for 8 days, the pig that had oolong tea kept on crying for 7 days. By the 8th day, he stopped crying and died. And so they realized, and then so the UK had a huge movement that tea is actually addictive and it's actually bad for you. But they couldn't ban it. And so for most of the 18th century, we start getting to finance here, the UK was actually losing silver to China. So the study from 1752 to 1800, cumulatively, China had an inflow of 106 silver dollars cumulatively over the 48-year period. And so as the UK tried to to balance the trade, they actually sent a guy, and then I actually have a list of the characters because the names are actually quite confusing. Lord Macartney, to go and pay tribute to the 80th birthday of Qianlong Huangdi in 1793. He was 82 by then, but he was saying, let's do free trade, let's do trading, because the only place that was allowed to do trading at the time was in Guangdong, in Canton, because the Manchurian Emperor tried to keep the technology of Europe away, because it's a minority government ruling the majority Han. So actually, most people think that the emperor was very close to outside, but actually Manchurian emperors, actually, for example, Kangxi, Qianlong's grandfather, could speak Latin. They were highly cosmopolitan, but they knew that European culture is going to affect the Han psyche, and so they tried to ban it. And the only trade was done was in Canton, through the merchants. And for example, the top guy was a guy called Wu Bingjian at Dengang. He was now tallied to be the richest non-government character in all of Chinese history, after Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. And so they're doing trading, but then Qianlong said to Lord Macartney that actually China has everything that China ever needs, so no trading with you guys. So when the Chinese were selling tea to the British, and the British could not sell anything else to China because they were selling like knife and forks, and then where a private company was running an area, Bengal, and then in Bengal they used taxation to bankrupt the local merchants and farmers and forced the farmers to start growing opium, and started sending opium to China to balance the trade. But in let's say for example, 1800 to 1808, so in the first, let's say 10 years, China was still having a positive inflow of silver in the order of 26 million. And then around 1800, they were selling about 4,000 chests of opium. Opium was illegal at the time, but then, just like every other period in China, there's a huge network of local government that work very well with the opium traders that send the opium around the country. So that you can use an example. For example, opium is illegal, so is gambling. But so you have let's say the trader, Jardine, or let's say MGM. And then you've got the local junkets that will bring the people to come and gamble. And local junkets would work with the local government to bring the people. So it's exactly the same process. Jardine would send the opium, and then they would have local merchants, and then they most of them work with the military. That's why China lost, because the people that would definitely be on the negative side of the opium war was actually the people fighting the war. Because they were making, Lin Zexu was saying they're making about 99% of their revenue come from opium trading. And because of this, opium was seeping through. And by 1828 to 1836, for example, China was already losing silver in the order of 38 million against silver dollars. But actually, there's a very interesting point that is kind of neglected by most academics, which is, I think, the main point of my talk today, and that is the butterfly effect. That is, China was not actually closed. China was actually very open because China was using currency that is foreign, and that is silver. And silver at the time was scarce. That's why China was losing a lot of silver. And the Chinese officials thought it must be because of the opium. But that's actually a very interesting fact. Silver from the 1500s to the 1800s was mostly manufactured. 85% of all the silver that was produced was actually in three countries: Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico. In the early 1800s, how come there was scarcity of silver? How come China was losing so much silver? How come the British had to use opium? Because 1800s, there was the War of Independence in the three countries. That's why silver production actually went down 56.6% in the decades 1810 to 1820s. That's why there was a scarcity of silver. And when there's a scarcity of silver, because China was actually living off of the liquidity of the silver coming in from our exports. And that's why we're in a financial crisis. So I want to keep on bringing this point again and again, and that is, when you're using other people's currency in your system, for example, we're pegged to the US dollar, we have highest reserves, when there's a change in their monetary policy, it can completely affect you. And so that's the opium trade, and we started losing silver. So what do? So we had our national hero, Lin Zexu, came down and banned the silver. So he confiscated 20,000 chests of silver from merchants. 7,000 of them would come from a very famous name now, William Jardine. Jardine was the biggest opium trader at the time. Actually, he had a medical degree from Edinburgh, so he knew the effects of opium. And another interesting thing about Jardine, something that for you guys when you design your office, he had no chairs for visitors to make sure that all the meetings are very short. Yeah, so everyone was like, so get up. He doesn't even say get up. No chairs. So you can think about that. And then how did they destroy opium? They stopped burning. So you dig a hole, you put the opium in, you put the lime, and then the salt water would come in when the high tide, and then it would go away. So you can think of the industry, at the time, seafood must have tasted really good. And so it's like, how come I keep on wanting to go back to the banquet and eat more seafood? That's probably why. It's better than MSG. And then so that was a very tense situation. He took the opium, and then at the time, it was Charles Elliot, the superintendent of trade, the representative of the British government, because he was actually anti-opium. But then he believed in saving the British honor. And that's the main reason why they got into war. And they felt that the British was mistreated by the government of China. So when they took the opium away to be destroyed, he said one phrase that would lead to the war, and that is, the British government would make good of their losses. So it went from a dealing between the Chinese government with the opium traders to the Chinese government and the British government. And so they were kicked out of Guangzhou. They were staying in Macau at the time. It was a Portuguese. It wasn't colony at the time. It was rented by the Portuguese. And then it was a very tense situation because Lin Zexu forced them to sign a petition that you will never trade opium again. And then people like Jardine would not sign it. Actually, Jardine was back in England working with the Whigs, as in the Liberal Party, who was in power at the time, to force the British government to make war. Jardine made a really good quote that would actually encompass the whole episode. He said, "What is opium if without war?" So he knew that the only way to get the opium of his trade to go around China is to fight. And then so a very tense situation, and got even tenser when a bunch of British and American apparently soldiers went to a temple in Jimsha-Zui, and then they were drunk, and then they were like pointing. And that guy called Lin Weixi, was like telling them, and he was beaten to death. And when he was beaten to death, this is really a competing legal system. From the British side, they thought, we don't know who the actual killer is. So like everybody is innocent until proven guilty. From the Chinese side, it doesn't matter, you killed someone, so everybody should be executed. But then Charles Elliot would not let the British soldiers to be surrendered to the Qing, to Lin Zexu, and they were just fined and they were sent back to England, which is exactly the same case with, let's say, American soldiers killing a lot of Pakistanis or Iraqis. They usually just get a little penalty and they get sent back to America. And so this created a really tense situation where they were pushing all of the British from Macau. And then Jardine and all those guys were actually in England actually having a campaign. And the Whigs who were in power, actually the reason why they were in power, because Tories actually won the election a little bit earlier. But then because at the time Queen Victoria didn't like the ladies, the wives of the Tories, so they actually put back the Whigs because she preferred the ladies of the Whig Party. And the Whigs were actually very pro-free market, very libertarian, and philosophically, if you're libertarian, the line of what is legal and what is not legal actually blurs. For example, owning guns in America. Like, there would be a very libertarian thing, where the government should not meddle with this situation. And then the Tories was actually, half of the country was actually saying, you cannot fight a war over opium. And so one of the most, the highest profile person, eventually became one of the longest serving prime ministers in British history, was William Gladstone. He was saying, like, there's never been a war that is more unjust than the Opium War. Another thing about Gladstone was a famous quote by his rival, Benjamin Disraeli. Someone asked Benjamin Disraeli, what is the difference between a misfortune and a calamity? And then Disraeli would say, suppose William Gladstone would fall into the River Thames, it would be a misfortune. But to save him would be a calamity. So whenever you have any political figure you may not like, you can actually use that. If certain person would be fallen into the Victoria Harbour, it would be a misfortune. To save him would be a calamity. And so there was a huge debate. And then at the end, there was a vote. 271 votes for fighting the war, 262 against. So by a narrow margin of 9 votes, the gunboats sailed from India, from the UK, and started fighting the war.